Chapter 3 Toby the Transform. My body is that of something else. Suddenly, once I come into contact with another person with powers, I can not only copy their power but enhance it. I not only nearly beat my father but Bob with this new power. Bob is a powerful opponent with the disadvantage of both being confused with my identity and then being surprised by my power. I won the fight only out of luck and having multiple advantages on my part. Right now I am shaking in my seat out of anticipation of gym class. Rebecca sits next to me and she is silently giggling to herself as our teacher goes on about some sort of math problem. I lean over towards her while facing the teacher and whisper, "What are you giggling about?" She leans over towards me and cheerfully whispers, "When you told me you ate a table, I thought that you might be able to transform into my I mean a desk." I chuckle quietly before I say, "I am so happy that I got these powers instead. That would be lame if I just transformed into a table." Rebecca's smile turns to a frown for a second before returning back to a smile. I didn't think much about it. "Hey Rebecca, would you like to lend me your power during gym class?" She looks at me and politely states, "I think that I would like to see your raw potential. Or maybe what you can do on a more flexible power under your hands." She seems sad, but there was no way that I would point that out. The bell rings and I and the other students rush to the huge gymnasium. As I got past the giant metal doors and entered inside this huge padded room, Mr. Grack was standing in the middle with a clipboard. He was a heavily built man wearing shorts that revealed his legs and a white t-shirt that revealed his nips. It was as if he wasn't wearing clothes. Grack looks at me and shouts, "Toby, get over here and fight me." In a loud sonic boom, he sends his shoulder in my chest. The second that his shoulder touches me, the burst of power that surrounding my body erupted. Hair coiled around my body and exploded in a gust of wind on the bottom of my foot. I pressed against our teacher. I was surprised when I saw that I was at least slowing him down. I then coiled the air around my arms and blasted from my hands and start pushing him back. The air that was spinning around my body was acting like a wall between me and Grack's shoulder. "I see that you're now way stronger than before, and with the new physique of yours I can tell that you're going to need to train. That power of yours." We both stop and we stand in front of one another as hundreds of students lay their eyes on me and him. In a cocky tone, I just couldn't help but state, "I think that I am better to equip this power than you are." Then a giant whirlwind enveloped around the couch before a sharp gust of wind slashes out at me. I was able to duck under the wind blade and coil it around my arm. As the sharp wind blade began to coil around my arm, I considered what I could do with this power, and suddenly an idea came to my mind. I grabbed the air out in front of my and the very air began to swirl and condense into a single-edged short sword. It was as if the very winds were inside of glass about to break. The blade turned black with lightning bursting from it. Clouds formed around my feet before I sprint towards the coach. Grack kept swinging wind blades at me, but with the extra maneuverability with the water from the clouds beneath my feet that moved me, I was able to dodge the incoming attacks. As I got close, I got sucked up into the whirlwind and saw Grack in the eye of it. He looks down and smiles at me. With my blade in hand, I raised it in the air and lightning began to strike everywhere within the storm, turning the whirlwind black. As the lightning was carried in the wind, I gathered all of it to the tip of my blade. Grack squeezes the whirlwind as he makes it spin faster. I took up my blade and with one swing an arc of lightning was launching towards Grack. He uses the gust of wind that surrounds me and squeezes it around me before the arc of lightning struck his chest and sent him hurtling towards the ground. The whirlwind began to cut me up, but the pain was nothing like what I felt eating the table. I just used the whirlwind of air to get me down and then disperse. Once my feet were placed on the ground, I saw Grack standing with a wide and prideful stance as his chest was bare and scorched. He lets out a big barrel of a laugh before he states, "Now if that attack was just a little more powerful, I would have been dead. But now I wonder how you did that." I say, "I was just thinking of how wind can blow clouds, and with water, or in this case the sweat that this padded room has built over all these years, the wind can become clouds, and then from there it was just thanks to my science teacher's boring lectures. But the sword idea was all my credit." Grack lets out another big barrel laugh before his face got scarily serious as he menacingly says, "I want you to show me the very extent of my power. Or you can face the top student." I used the air and made two short swords of storm clouds. Grak looks at me and smiles like a hardened psychopath. Black tornadoes began to swell behind me as Grak's body began to be hidden in a veil of spiraling wind. As more air coils behind me, I make the air itself that began to coil around into tornadoes take shape into thousands of tiny spears. Grak lunges forwards at me before dispersing himself, making him practically invisible. I took the air and surrounded my feet with storm clouds. If I can't see him, I'll have to strike everywhere with lightning. Now this might target some kids and get him to body block them. That is how I will assure my victory and not hit a kid. I aimed at the clouds at the kids and then launched 5 lightning bolts at them. Grak burst out of thin air and took all 5 lightning bolts to his chest. Thanks goodness I didn't make those bolts powerful, or else I might have killed Grak. He stands up and his face is just expressed with anger. I calmly state, "Turn invisible again and I will launch more than 5 bolts at those kids behind you." The kids began to grow expressions of concern, and that made me feel bad. I don't want them to fear me, but I must win. Now, since I have the power in my hands, I think that I should not be on the bottom anymore. I will show not just Grak but this entire school that I have what it takes to be top chef. Grak, with his arms wide and to his side, jumps towards me with air blasting him up into the air. I aim my blades at him and on command thousands of storm spears volleyed at Grak. I jumped towards him with my blades at my sides as I followed just behind the spears. Grak held out his palms, and as if he was mustering all of his strength, a huge blast of wind blew not just me and the spears away, but also the very mats on the ground into the roof of the building. As my back hit the matted roof, I was relieved, but the lightning spears and mattress hitting me was as if tasers and stones hit my body. I could hear the bones in my chest shatter, and the pain that was rushing over my body like a waterfall just made me scream out in pain. As I fell towards the ground, anger erupted in me that I haven't experienced before. I made the very wind that surrounded me as I feel make armor that coiled around my body. Upon slamming into the ground, I tore the mats and made every piece of rubble spiral around me. Grak lunges towards me and in a burst of air like the last blast before, launched me back into the wall and made the mats themselves spiral around me. The very air that escapes my body is now being used up by my armor. As my head felt light, I made it apparent that I had tricks up my sleeve. My armor now spiraled out of control as snow and ice were launched in every direction. My skin grew goosebumps. It was so cold. My breath made smoke, and the students were being protected by Grak as he shielded them with his air that he was launching from his palms. Now ice might not get him to kneel, but now since it was cold, his body movements will be restricted like mine. But this will now give me much more possibilities of winning. I put storm clouds into the air and made the whole gymnasium dark and cold. Now I couldn't see them nor Grak. But the snow on the ground alarmed me that the kids were running everywhere. The crunch of the snow, the chattering of teeth, and the screams of help echoed in my ears. Made me feel scared, but at this pace Grak will have to now try to defend possibly hundreds of kids with his body and power now. I placed my hands into the snow and breathed hastily as I focused my power into the storms above me. The lightning crashed and the thunder roared, the kids' screams were ignored, and Grak's yelps of pain were endorsed. It was like a beautiful orchestra of light and booming thunder as behind the falling hail I saw Grak zooming around the place, taking thunderbolt after thunderbolt, trying his hardest to save the surrounding children. In the corner of my eye I saw Rebecca with a huge wooden tower shield, blocking my attacks and letting other students cower behind her. Randall looked at me and his aura was just screamed murder. Chills ran up my back and made me shudder in fear. I thought that he along with the others were going to attack me if I let this whole thing die down. Then as a last resort to get my muscles moving again, I made hot air from outside the gymnasium squeeze through the doors and coil around my body. As my body began to get warm, I stood up and was relieved of how comfortable I felt compared to the other students. As lightning and hail struck around me, I began to coil clouds around my arms. This way I could control lightning and hail when I wanted to. From the clouds I produce a storm short sword and ran at Grak. He turns towards me and with one palm he directs it at falling hail and the other at me. With my palm I aimed it back at him, and as a burst of air from him launched my own hail towards me, I launched a volley of lightning at Grak before deflecting incoming hail with my blade. I continued sprinting towards Grak as I launched bolts at him to keep him from trying to defend the other students. I don't want them to get hurt, so the bolts and hail are very lowly painful. In my mind I am thinking that I just want to win. I don't want to hurt others. I don't want them all to gang up against me. I don't. And so on. But the rush of adrenaline and power rushing through me was not like anything else. I wanted to just ignore the I don't and just move forward and cause havoc upon this gymnasium. But my heart withheld me as I raised the sword in the air and made the clouds disperse and stop the hail and storm. The other students looked at me and exited the gymnasium before Greg sprinted towards me. I swung my blade at him, but he stopped in his tracks and with a gust of wind was able to jump backwards and evade my swing. As we stood a few feet away from one another, I stare into Greg's eyes and in the most humble tone I could manage I deeply say, "I'm sorry for going overboard. I will make sure to keep this between you and me for this battle. Make sure to make this a good fight, Greg." He smiles at me and crosses his arms while closing his eyes. He cheerfully and proudly states, "Nah, that was on me, kid. Just go apologize to those other kids, okay?" I nod my head as I gladly say, "Yes, sir." I ran out of the gymnasium and saw the students with nurses making sure that they were all right. I stood at attention with my heels pressed against each other and my arms held behind my back as I declare, "I am so sorry for all of what I have done today. Please allow my apology show you that I just got a little out of control. I understand if you all hate me now. Just please don't be upset with Greg for not being able to protect all of you, but be upset with me for using you all for target practice. I am ready to accept the punishment that you all agree on." I looked down shamefully as the surge of power rushed away from my body. Suddenly a pair of soft hands touch my shoulders and a soft and silky voice says, "Toby, don't be sad. You're quite powerful and no one is hurt." Suddenly the emotional baggage caught up with me and tears started to burst from my eyes. I tried to silence my sadness by biting my lower lip, but nothing would silence it. One of the soft hands left my shoulder and was placed on my chin, lifting my head to see Rebecca. Suddenly I couldn't control the urge to cry and pulled her closer to me so that I could silence my tears into her shoulder. She places her hand on the back of my head and calmly hugs me. "You can cry, Toby. We all understand," I shout. "But I nearly destroyed the school and the students. Now everyone hates me. And all I can do is blame myself." I wrapped my arms around her and began to squeeze with anger and sadness. Her body began to mold and squishy, but yet she did not shout in pain or tell me to stop. She just hugs me back and strokes my hair with her fingers. What got me to stop my crying was the laughter that arose from the crowd behind Rebecca. I opened my eyes and saw that the crowd was laughing. I heard a kid in the back shout, "That kid is scaringly powerful, but when a woman comes around he starts to bawl." I saw my arms around Rebecca and saw that my arms were nearly pressed up against my chest. I immediately stopped squeezing and Rebecca let out a little sigh. Force of impulse made me let go of her completely and place my hands on her face to see if she was okay. She looked at me with a bright red face and a smile. I let out a sigh of relief as I embraced her for a second time, gently wrapping her in my arms. She calmly and happily says, "You're not hated. You're loved." I began to blush as the others stared and laughed. It was something joyous to see. But that all ended with Randall staring at me with crazed eyes like he was going to kill me. He adorned a long, wide smile, and his hand was raised and looked as if though he was squeezing a human skull in the palm of his hands.
That was chapter 3 of the Gourmet Gladiator. Go check it out on Inkit. Thank you. Have a good day. I'm Grant Ayers.